Dawn spills over Los Angeles in 1940 like a secret that can't quite keep itself. Streetcars rattle past shuttered storefronts. The air smells of oil, hot dust, and the faint tongue of ocean salt blown inland. And tucked behind hedges of eucalyptus at a new plant in Inglewood, a gate swings open to a factory painted the color of fog. Inside, men and women file into a building that, politely, tells the world it makes trainers. AT-6 South, instructional craft, harmless as a chalkboard. But behind a door, marked with a small Codename 7-3, another kind of lesson is being written. The British Purchasing Commission arrives in plain suits. They step gingerly among drafting boards and stacks of spruce, a world away from London's extinguished street lamps and shattered glass. The men from North American Aviation, James, Dutch Kindleberger, the boss with sleeves rolled just so, J.H. Lee Atwood, a calculating presence with a slide rules calm, and a German-born engineer named Edgar Schmude, bearing the quiet intensity of someone who understands that lines on paper can shape the fate of skies. Pull them into a room where the blinds are drawn. A map of Europe hangs on one wall, pins pushed into Poland, Denmark, Belgium, France. A cluster is swelling over Britain. The British want P-40s Curtiss fighters, respectable, available, licensed if North American will build them. It is a practical request. Kindleberger has already gone to Buffalo to see Curtiss. He walked the floor and studied the jigs. He came back not with enthusiasm, but with a different idea, the kind that makes your throat dry before you speak it out loud. He tells the British, "If you let us build under license, we'll lose time tooling up for someone else's airplane. Give us the chance, and we'll design you a new fighter from scratch, one suited to your needs, built around the latest aerodynamic research. We can have a production prototype in 120 days." Silence isn't unusual in meetings like this. But this silence carries the kind of gravity that can bend the course of events. The British are not in the mood for experiments. Their part of the world has been burning since 1939. Their spring has been stolen by falling countries. Their summer will bring the desperate fight of the Battle of Britain. But time is the currency of survival, and the proposal the Americans lay before them is an audacious bargain. Trust us to do the impossible faster than doing the ordinary. There is no fanfare when the letter of intent is signed. Just a date late, May 1940, and a quantity that is as much promise as it is order. In public, America is still neutral. In private, this factory becomes a place where a foreign order is treated like a life raft. Steeled by the clarity that the war's tide will not wait, Kindleberger gathers his team on the shop floor. The message is cleanly cut. No weekends, no excuses. Concurrent design and production. We will build the jigs while we draft the airplane. We will cook coffee at midnight and calculus at dawn. And above all, we will keep our mouths shut. The NA-73 doesn't yet have a name. It is a set of dimensions and constraints. A single-seat fighter with heavy armament. Rugged enough for muddy forward fields. The nose wrapped around an Allison-1710 engine that the Army Air Corps can actually supply. Great range at low altitudes for the kind of scouting and striking the British will need across French fields and Dutch canals. What it will become is not clear. What is clear is the method. A factory turned into a think tank that stamps out metal. A drafting room with a war's worth of urgency humming over each pencil stroke. Schmude walks the length of the room, seeing the plane in layers. A wing that can slice the air with less turbulence. A radiator duct shaped not as a necessary drag, but as an opportunity. A cockpit that is honest, not pretty. Atwood brings the discipline of tests that haven't happened yet. He has a way of translating risk into numbers, and then making those numbers behave. Young engineers stand on boxes to reach the full-scale lofting boards, where the airplane is drawn at life size. Curves smoothed with spline weights and fingers blackened by charcoal. A plywood mock-up rises from sawhorses in a corner, stripped of paint or comfort, a wooden ghost to be walked around and argued with. Outside on Inglewood streets, people still read about Europe in the morning papers like it's another planet. Here, neutrals do not exist. The floor manager posts a clock and writes in chalk, Day 1 of 120. When it's erased that night and replaced with Day 2, the gesture is as humble as it is electric. The factory runs on the idea that this countdown is not only real but beatable. A warplane is not yet a weapon. First, it must be a decision. To build a fighter in months requires more than skill. It requires a kind of collective vow. Riveters take seats next to mathematicians. The tool shop stocks hardwood alongside aluminum. Draftsmen drop from 2B to HB when they need darker lines. At lunchtime, someone reads aloud a clipped London story about a dog that refused to leave its bombed-out stoop. They don't talk about it, but work speeds up. In the evenings, a civilian test pilot named Vance Breeze steps through the shop, measuring with his eyes, cracking spare jokes, offering the kind of feedback that can only be given by someone who understands that an airplane at rest can never tell you all its secrets. He touches the leading edge of a wing mock-up and smiles the way a musician might smile at a well-tuned instrument. Mid-June, the British return for the mock-up inspection. The room is cooler than the air outside, a trick of shade and concrete. The Pratt and Whitney engines in the trainer line whir like bees beyond the partition. The visitors run their hands along the plywood like antique dealers. They want guns, and the American engineers give them guns. Browning 50s in the wings, with .30 caliber companions. They want a camera port. They want the belly clear. They want ease of maintenance, because a glamorous fighter that cannot be serviced under rain in a field is a liability, not an asset. They pledge to a name later. Today, they approve what the skeleton will be. Day 80 comes with glue stains on the hands of designers and sleepless arcs under their eyes. The radiator duct is argued like a legal case. Curved here, lengthened there, a little lip at the inlet to keep flow attached, even when the nose pitches up. Someone passes a NACA, report fresh from Virginia, pages whispering of a laminar-flow wing that, if kept clean and shaped with precision, can delay drag's onset. It is science pressed into service. In the corner, an electrician tapes a borrowed flashlight to the brim of his cap and keeps going. By September, the airplane's bones are metal, not wood. The line leaders lay down rivet guns and step back. A machine stands in the hangar light with its skin newly polished. It has a wide-shouldered wing and an underbelly scoop, an attitude that suggests both speed and sense. The plant doors roll open. A ramp that saw trainers now receives something that carries a different kind of weight. It is, as promised, a prototype in months rolled out in just over 100 days. A note to an embattled ally written in aluminum instead of ink. That is when the secret factory stops being an idea and becomes a silhouette. Not a myth, not a legend, not yet named, but real enough to push into sunlight and dare the sky to accept it. What makes an airplane feel inevitable is rarely obvious from the outside. The P-51's lines seem simple. A razor of a wing, a clean nose, a scoop under the belly. But inside North American's factory, the shape is an argument the team has with air itself. At the heart of the challenge sits the wing. Traditional fighter wings are thick, with the point of maximum thickness closer to the leading edge. That shape is durable and forgiving, but as the air accelerates over the top of the wing at speed, it trips early into turbulence, piling on drag like a tax. An ACA's work in the late 1930s suggested something radical: shift that thickness aft and maintain a more gradual pressure recovery. Keep the flow laminar, smooth, and ordered over more of the wing's chord. In theory, the drag drops. In practice, the wing must be shaped and finished with care to hold that smoothness, and still land on muddy strips without breaking your back. Schmude believes. He and Atwood specify a new wing section from NACA's 45 series, a laminar flow profile unusual for a frontline fighter. They do not sell it as magic. They sell it as an honest tool. The wing is single spar, with fuel held in wet sections to extend range. The landing gear retracts inward, giving the wing its sleek planform and a track wide enough to keep takeoffs and landings civilized. Workmen smooth the skin and countersink the rivets where they can. It is not perfect laminar flow. Manufacturing realities rarely are. But most fighters of the day are wearing heavy coats of drag. The Mustang's wing will be an athlete's shirt. Then there's the radiator. Put any powerful piston engine in a fighter, and you must cool it or lose it. Radiators eat energy. They convert your forward motion into heat exchange and waste it to the air. The NA-73 team frames the problem more aggressively. Can the belly duct be shaped so that the air heated by the radiator expands and accelerates as it exits, offsetting some or all of the drag it causes? NACA's research and British engineer F.W. Meredith's earlier analysis hinted at possibilities. Execution is everything. Inlet geometry, diffuser length, boundary layer control, an exit with a controllable flap to meter flow. On paper, the Meredith effect can produce a smidgen of thrust to payback cooling. In reality, if you get the layout right, you at least erase radiator's penalty and perhaps win a little in the bargain. They test duct sections in the factory with fans and makeshift sensors. The early data is good enough to go forward. The duct's shape becomes part of the airplane's character, that distinctive scoop that will later make a jumble of school children's drawings instantly recognizable. While the engineers argue physics, the factory invents time. Concurrent engineering isn't a phrase here. It's a survival instinct. Tooling crews build fixtures with the same intensity as stress analysts run load paths. The lofting shop draws full-scale curves while procurement runs the city for hardware, as if the war were already domestic. Inglewood streets become an impromptu logistics grid. The plant cafeteria serves coffee with the humor it comes from being too tired to be anything but generous. The only extravagance is speed. Rollout happens in early September 1940. The prototype is a gleaming curiosity in the Southern California sun. Its uncowled Allison lines clean, its inlet scoop a polite challenge to convention. Cameras click. There are no public speeches. Warplanes are like secrets, most effective when everyone pretends not to notice until they are already over the channel. And then, on October 26th, the sky finds out. Vance Breeze, wearing the unflappable look of someone who has taught himself to keep grins in check, climbs aboard. The NA-73X thunders down Mines Field and rises on its own logic. A photographer watches through a viewfinder and forgets to press the shutter. The machine is light on the controls, honest in pitch, stable in roll. It was a thoroughbred, he will say later, implying what everyone in the shop hopes. This could be the one. Test flights are never only triumphs. Within weeks, a routine hop turns hurried when the Allison coughs, stumbles, and quits. Fuel. The pilot, Paul Balfour, glides the prototype down and brushes it into a landing that ends with a tender smack of metal on dirt. Mistakes in test programs are data. The NA-73X is bruised but not broken. The factory pulls it back inside like a wounded bird. Sheets off, skins repaired, plumbing reconsidered, checklists rewritten. When Bob Chilton takes it up again in December, the airplane is a shade wiser, the machine and the men both. Meanwhile, the British are watching with the hunger that only necessity breeds. They followed the blueprint into metal, and then metal into air, eyes narrowing, not with doubt, but the tension of hope. In their back pockets are not just orders for prototypes, but for hundreds of production machines. War is logistics. Logistics is decisions made before you feel comfortable making them. Even as the prototype finds its legs, the factory is cutting metal for a thing that will be called, soon enough, the Mustang I. In it, the British will ask for a mix of .50 and .303 Brownings, for a camera in the wing, for provisions for a radio familiar to their crews. There are other considerations, less glamorous than wing sections and radiator ducts, but vital. A canopy line low enough to see over the nose in a strafing run. The tail sturdy enough to shrug off rough fields. Panels laid out for mechanics who will be cold and in a hurry. Schmude walks the line and uses the word clean a lot, not pretty clean. Atwood prunes anything that doesn't buy performance, reliability, or speed of manufacture. Kindleberger, who knows that a fighter is only as good as the force that can be persuaded to pay for and fly it, keeps visitors moving, keeps the coffee hot, keeps the story tight. In a country that has not yet entered the war, secrecy is a function of politeness and discretion. The city around the plant, bright with movie marquees and starlets shutting their chins at flashbulbs, barely notices the grimmer sparkle of landing lights slipping over the Pacific at dusk. But the workers know. They leave in the early morning with metal filings clinging to their cuffs and see headlines from Europe pasted in pharmacy windows. They understand the equation viscerally. Every day saved is an engine not failing over France, a pilot not climbing out of a wreck. Speed matters, and yet there is no panic. The work is precise, methods made neat. Part by part, the airplane is transformed from a proposition into a tool. What they accomplish is a kind of alchemy Americans will repeat throughout the war, turning sunlight into aluminum, aluminum into speed. Without a single wheel leaving the ground, you can sense how that speed might be spent. Across the ocean, trains in France move on time according to German orders. Across chalk, citizens whisper. Some machines are built to knife those distances and bring confusion to tidy timetables. The Mustang is being designed to do exactly that. There is a moment, just after an invention is proven, when the idea must muscle its way into the routines of production. The NA-73X has flown. It has limbered its wings and shrugged off a bad landing. The British order stands. Now, in a neutral country, the act of building an airplane for a foreign air force becomes a tightrope walk of letters, permissions, and workarounds. The United States is not blind to what is happening. President Roosevelt speaks of an arsenal of democracy long before Pearl Harbor makes it official. But neutrality laws have their rhythms. Paperwork slows what steel wants to accelerate. The U.S. Army Air Corps requisitions 2 airframes from the British order for its own evaluation, redesignating them XP-51. That bureaucratic gesture is not hostility. It is the practical insistence of a service that has an eye for promising machines. It also signals something else. In the lean light of 1941, this foreign fighter is suddenly not that foreign. It will be studied at Wright Field. It will be flown by American test pilots who, like their British colleagues, will find in it a temper both willing and sharp. Deliveries to the Royal Air Force begin in late 1941. Painted in camouflage, the new aircraft arrives in British hands and is christened with a name that speaks of speed and stubbornness: Mustang. It is assigned first to Army Cooperation Command, then to Tactical Reconnaissance Units. Its Allison engine breathes best at low altitudes. Its supercharger is single-stage, happiest under the weather rather than above it. At those low levels, the Mustang is a phenomenon, slicing along hedgerows and canal lines with speed that makes the ground look slower than usual. It carries guns and cameras. It shoots what it sees. At Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, pilots put it through its paces and report on what it is and what it is not. Below 15,000 feet, it is a revelation, fast and smooth, with a reach beyond most fighters in its class. Above 20,000, where air thins and the battle for bomber escorts is being planned, the Allison gasps. Its single-stage supercharger cannot keep pace with the crowd. In later years, the world will celebrate the Mustang as a high-altitude escort that made deep daylight bombing possible. In 1942, the British have a different bird in their net. A sweep-and-strike fighter that turns northern France into a treacherous place for German convoys. Back in Inglewood, the factory keeps its head down and its tempo up. The trainer line runs, the Mustang line grows. The smell of cutting fluid and varnish hangs in the air like a second atmosphere. Women take places on rivet teams, in inspection, and machine tools. The wartime rearrangement of American labor visible row by row. Buses after midnight pull to the gate and exhale a second shift. Black workers, drawn west by rumors of steady wages, find their way into North American scheduling sheets. The place is livelier than any one person's politics. A democratic factory, long before the democracy it feeds, is in uniform. Speeches are rare. Paychecks frequent. North American adapts the basic airframe for different uses, while the world decides its next moves. The A-36, fitted with dive brakes and a different wing, takes shape for the U.S. Army Air Forces as a precision attacker. It will carry the fight over Sicily and in Italy later, pockmarking rail yards and road columns. A P-51A, with refinements and heavier armament, takes on more teeth. But the essential genius of the airframe remains. A fast, efficient wing. A cooling system that does not make a liar of the air. A fuselage that holds its drag in check and its gasoline in quantity. The British, who named it in the first place, try another experiment. Pilots and engineers at Hucknall in England, where Rolls-Royce keeps its test facility, look at the Mustang and cannot quite let the idea go, if only it breathed better above 20,000 feet. In April 1942, a Rolls-Royce engineer and test pilot, Ronald Harker, flies a Mustang and takes notes the way a man writes down quietly that he has found an opportunity. His report is stark, The airframe is exceptional. Our Merlin could make it sing at heights where the war is being decided. Rolls test fits a Merlin into a Mustang airframe and discovers that paper intuition wears beautifully when bolted to aluminum. The British send the word across the Atlantic. In Detroit, Packard is already manufacturing Merlins under license. America, which is neutral no more, listens. Inglewood, relentless, but now one of many war plants humming night and day, begins to split the Mustang story in two directions at once. Build what works now for low-level work, and adapt what must be adapted for high-level escort. It is during this pivot that the identity of the secret factory becomes less about one building and more about a network. The Defense Plant Corporation funds, constructs, and equips facilities faster than anyone would have dared in peacetime. Dallas, Texas, will soon host a second North American plant that will join the Pony Express. You could stand in a field in 1941 and see only grass. In a year, you could stand in the same spot and feel the floor shake when a new fighter starts up. Yet even as momentum builds, the project remains human scale. A jig builder named Joe marks his steel with a two-letter code that tells the next worker where the part belongs and when to inspect. Mary, who grew up thinking airplanes were feathers and wishbones, is now warned to keep a rag in her pocket because her hands will be in chrome molybdenum every morning. Atwood's engineers are under orders not to let drawings age more than a day without revision if they need it. And someone posts a photo of the prototype in its first flight on a corkboard, not as a trophy, but as a promise to the next line of fuselages. A promise that this is what you are building into the world. The Mustang's first British operations are not famous in the way of later conquests, but they are instructive. The aircraft collects a mosaic of photographs of coastlines, marshalling yards, factory courtyards. It strafes and shatters trucks. A few are lost to flak and bad luck, to engines that fail where there are no nearby options, but fields that are either too small or too soft. Every return teaches something. Mechanics learn the new pace at which the airplane consumes its tires. Pilots write in logbooks that they can run from danger in a way that feels new. And in the back rooms of strategy, a single question gets asked more and more loudly. If this airplane can be made a high flyer, what kind of difference could it make? When the Merlin musters under a Mustang's cowl, it is not simply an engine swap, it is a redefinition. The Packard-built Merlin-designated V1650 arrives with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that keeps breath in the throttle all the way into the thin air where condensation trails bloom. The first American production variant to wear it, the P-51B, takes to the sky in 1943 and at once suggests that daylight bombing over deep Germany might not be a doomed proposition after all. North American's Dallas plant, born on farmland and built with wartime magic that turns blueprints into overhead cranes in months, joins Inglewood to hammer out the new version. The factories are cities unto themselves. Canteens that serve at odd hours, infirmaries that patch small injuries and send people back, bus lines that snake out into neighborhoods and pull people into their appointed places at lathes and presses, plywood partitions with pin-ups, and chalkboards with shift targets. If you are a manager here, you sleep in your office because the meetings never stop. If you are a worker, you hold two truths in your head at once. The part you fit must be perfect, and it must be done now. The P-51BC series has a stretched back that limits visibility to the rear, a compromise that will later be addressed with a bubble canopy in the D model. But even with that, it is a revelation. Put drop tanks under its wings and belly paper, or metal vessels filled with gasoline. It can be dropped when combat calls, and it can follow the bombers beyond previous escort ranges. It is a scalpel that reaches the surgeon's table. In the European Air War, time collapses into names that sound like weather. There is Big Week in February 1944 Operation Argument, when the Allies send bombers against German aircraft factories day after day. Before the Mustang, the arithmetic of these raids looks like blood. Schweinfurt-Regensburg in 1943 costs the 8th Air Force dearly. The idea that a bomber will always get through has been broken by reality. But with the Mustang first BC models, and soon the bubble canopy D, the escort, can stick with the heavy formations to target and back, not just part of the way. The effect is immediate. Bomber losses drop not to zero, or is not kind enough for that, but to levels that let strategy breathe. Jimmy Doolittle, who takes command of the 8th Air Force, gives fighters a new mandate. Do not sit close to the bomber boxes and wait for Germans to come to you. Go out and find them. Clear the sky. The Mustangs, with their range, their climb, and their numbers growing daily, roam. They bounce interceptors as they scramble. They chase down fighters as they form up. They cut at the sinews of the Luftwaffe. Pilot training, fuel, morale. A German pilot now has to worry about being surprised on climb out. A German factory, about the sound of strafing guns in the lunch hour. Range, once merely a statistic, becomes a strategy. Names attach themselves to this period. Doane Blakesley pushes his 4th Fighter Group hard. George Preddy rides the Mustang's balance with reckless grace. Bud Anderson writes quietly about his Old Crow. The Tuskegee Airmen, 332nd Fighter Group take P-51 BCS and later Ds into escort over Italy and beyond, their tails painted red, growing a record that is irreducible to anecdotes, but heavy with them. Somewhere at altitude, condensation trails lace a winter sky to a horizon that includes Berlin. The first escorted missions reached that city in March 1944. The bombing war changes afterward because the defenders are bled in the air and hounded on the ground. The war in Europe is not decided by fighters alone, but a particular fighter, built in 2 American factories that refuse to wait for comfort to proceed, gives the bombers their teeth. It is easy to celebrate the sleek parts of the story. The silhouette, the speeds, the aces' grins. The factories remind us of the sediment beneath that sheen. Dallas fights expansion pains with schedules and bandages. Inglewood's lines get interrupted by air raid scares and blackout curtains. Southern California's coast is jittery after Pearl Harbor. Tooling breaks under constant use. Men get hurt and do not tell anyone because missing a shift feels like treason. Women negotiate the clamor of the shop floor with a frankness that makes the old world blink. Pay envelopes include war bond deductions. The walls have posters, yes, but the real propaganda is a pay line that moves quickly. Quality control evolves into an art. Rivet lines on the laminar-flow wing must be kept to tolerances that, on paper, don't look human. They become human anyway. The radiator duct's fit is fussed over in a way that would have gotten a man laughed at in 1938. Now it's standard. A spate of overheats in early deliveries is tracked down to a misadjusted exit flap linkage. A handful of guns jam in cold air. Fixes ripple down the line. Pilots complain about fuel management across multiple tanks. Engineers devise a sequence that balances endurance with handling. Every complaint is a breadcrumb to a better machine. By mid-1944, the P-51D rolls out with a teardrop canopy, a cut-down rear fuselage, and 650s in the wings with improved feed systems. Visibility is transformed. Production balloons. North Americans' plants become the largest single source of fighters in America's arsenal. Between them, they will build thousands of Mustangs. If you walked the line from nose to tail at Inglewood, you could count a nation's urgencies in the number of hands that touch one airplane hundreds of pairs, imprinting a particular kind of care onto aluminum. In Dallas, pre-dawn light shines on a parking lot full of cars that would have felt like a parade in any other year. Here, it's Tuesday. The airplane's effect on the ground war is subtler but real. With air superiority contested and then won, daylight bombers throttled German industry into stammers, and the armies of the United States, Britain, Canada, and their allies step forward under skies that have fewer enemies lurking above. It is a chain of cause and effect assembled with bolts and patience. The Mustang is not a golden bullet. It is a bicycle chain, one link in a mechanism that, together, drives. In the Pacific, Mustangs arrive later and fill gaps where long overwater legs and high-altitude escort again matter. They range from island outposts, carry ordnance against airfields and shipping, and learn the particular violence of tropical weather. The airplane proves adaptable. That has always been its secret. Every war theater is a different story with the same kind of work. An engine waking at dawn, a pilot who is young, a crew who has turned the night into readiness. By 1945, when Europe's war gutters out and then stops, the factories breathe and do not quite believe it. Dallas pulls back on shifts. Inglewood counts frames still on the line and plots how many the war will still pay for. The Mustang shifts roles, becomes a transition to jet ages, even as its shape remains persuasive. In a decade, it will fill air racing pylons with the sound of a generation that cannot stop looking at speed. But the part of its story that explains its impact is set in the years when the factories that built it could, conceivably, be called secret. Not because no one knew they were there, but because the methods and motives making them work could only belong to a particular time and a particular pressure. There is a temptation, when talking about machines that matter, to treat them as inevitabilities. The P-51 Mustang looks, in hindsight, like the airplane that had to happen. Laminar wing, efficient cooling, a great engine, range enough to keep a promise. But inevitability is almost always the child of risk met at the right hour. What happened at North American in 1940, the decision to say no to the safe license and yes to the dangerous original, was not preordained. It was chosen. Chosen by a president who believed that American factories should aim outward on neutrality still held. By British officials willing to stake scarce funds and scarcer time on a proposal made with conviction but not data. By a factory that believed it could be two things at once: cautious where it mattered and reckless where speed demanded. This secret factory was not a single building hidden under ivy. It was a way of working. Inside its walls, draftsmen and machinists practiced concurrent invention, a rhythm that allowed wing ribs and radiator ducts and gun doors to evolve in parallel. Leaders did not guard information like jewelry. They spread it like bread. Test pilots did not pretend to be fearless. They insisted on being listened to. The line between design and production blurred. When the British walked the mock-up, it wasn't a performance. It was a collaboration. When the American Army Air Forces appropriated 2 airframes, It wasn't theft. It was an endorsement stamped with bureaucracy's odd seal. You can measure the impact in numbers. In a war that made spreadsheets a kind of weapon, the Mustang shows up neatly. Over 15,000 built by war's end. Bomber loss rates dropping by percentages that relieved planning rooms and sleeping rooms. Enemy fighter production crippled under assault made possible by range and speed. You can trace the outcomes too. The daylight bombing campaign, controversial and costly, becomes sustainable when escorts arrive that can fight over targets and not just at the fringes of them. The Luftwaffe yields sky and then influence on ground because its pilots cannot be at peace from takeoff to landing. But scores and sortie counts only say so much. There is another measure, softer grain but harder wood. A pilot writing home about the way the Mustang felt over the Ardennes in winter, the way it practiced kindness where it could, by bringing him back. A mechanic who understood how the belly scoops. Hinge door made a difference not just to speed, but to sanity when a mission ran long and temperatures ran high. A riveter who learned the notion of laminar flow, the only way that matters. By smoothing a panel again, because a supervisor tapped it with a fingernail and heard imperfection. These are the places where the Mustang stops being an artifact and becomes a texture in people's lives. History treats factories with ambivalence. We like battles and heroes. We like scenes in which a single decision giver points and a tide turns. Factories are messy. They are collective and therefore unattractive on a poster. Yet if you follow the line back from the photograph of Mustangs escorting bombers over Berlin to the moment when an early prototype sat under California's sun, you discover the most radical thing isn't a breakthrough or a dogfight. It is a room full of workers agreeing, tacitly, to make an airplane at a speed that would be considered impolite at any other moment in time. The North American plants are quiet now. Aircraft have come and gone. The ground that once shook has learned to rest. But the model they built, the synthesis of research, production, and partnership remains every time we face problems that seem to have only slow answers. The lesson of the Mustang's birth isn't that genius strikes. It's that discipline can sprint. Design doesn't need to wander if you draw on proven science and aim it at a clear need. People can be asked for a lot and deliver more when the stakes are understood, and respect goes both directions, from office to floor and back again. We live with crises today that do not look like 1940s headlines, but time still behaves the same. It is still the currency that buys lives saved or squandered. The P-51 secret factory teaches, in its insistently practical way, that building the right thing fast requires 3 promises. Do not seek permission to do what you already know is better. Listen to who must use what you make, and share what you learn with the speed you built it. Those are not wartime tricks. They are human capacities, dormant until someone decides to wake them. There are other endings to this story, each true. The nitpicker's ending. No, laminar flow in service was imperfect. No, the Meredith effect didn't turn a radiator into a rocket. The romantic's ending. A perfect airplane sculpted by need. America and Britain together discovering a shape that could both fight and fly home. The honest ending is a blend. A capable airframe improved when it met the engine it always deserved. Refined in factories that treated time as elastic and problems as invitations. And there is this last ending, which returns us to dawn in Los Angeles. The smell of oil and salt, the gate opening, a small sign over a door named NA73. It isn't hard to imagine those first days. The clock chalked on a board, the laughter a little forced, the coffee cheap and plentiful. It is harder to remember that the men and women who crossed that threshold did not know how their story would be told. They did not have the luxury of inevitability. They had work, and the belief that the right work, done at the right moment, could carry across a continent and an ocean and matter. If there is a call to be made from their labor across time, it is a quiet one. When someone comes with a need that is urgent and real, do not reach first for what you already know how to make. Reach, instead, for what the need deserves, and promise the time you can barely imagine meeting. Then close the doors, sharpen the pencils, turn on the lights, and build. The sky often rewards that kind of courage. So it turns out, does history.